The billionaire was never meant to survive that night. Flames devoured the wreckage, the forest echoing with screams and silence. But fate intervened, not with wealth, not with power, but with a stranger's hands pulling him from the fire. He survived, but survival came at a price: trust, betrayal, and a love he never expected. This is not just a story of riches or ruin. This is the night everything changed. He wasn't meant to survive the crash, but the woman who saved him would unravel his walls, shatter his doubts, and ignite a love that could never be bought. Hi, my beautiful story family. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here again today. Your support means the world as we grow this channel together, and I promise to keep bringing you powerful, emotional stories that will touch your heart. If you enjoy stories like this, please click subscribe and join our growing family. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Now, let us begin. The city skyline glittered like diamonds spilled across velvet, but Ethan Caldwell saw none of it. From the rooftop of his corporate tower, the billionaire heir leaned against the railing, the weight of his world pressing down harder than the night air. To the papers, he was the golden boy of Caldwell Global, handsome, untouchable, destined for greatness. But behind his sharp suits and champagne smiles lurked a man hollowed by expectation. He raised a glass of scotch to his lips, but it didn't dull the ache. His father's voice still rang in his head: "Don't be weak. Don't trust anyone. Love makes you vulnerable." He'd believed it once. He lived it still. But lately, something inside him rebelled, whispering that there had to be more than boardrooms and bloodless deals. He just didn't know what, or who, could make him listen. Miles away, Lena Brooks wiped the sweat from her brow as she tucked a loose strand of hair beneath her bandana. The hospital corridors buzzed with urgency, but her focus stayed locked on her mother's frail frame resting in bed. Her mother's medical bills were piling high, far beyond what her nursing aide salary could cover. Lena had picked up shifts, doubled her hours, even skipped meals, but still, it wasn't enough. And yet she refused to let despair swallow her. "You're going to get better, Mom," she whispered, brushing a gentle hand against her mother's forehead. "I'll find a way. I promise." Lena's strength was her armor. Her flaw? She carried it all alone. Letting others in, asking for help, was something she'd never been able to do. Two worlds. Two hearts, scarred in silence. Neither knew that fate had already tied their lives together in the most violent of ways. The night of the crash began like any other for Ethan. He boarded his sleek helicopter, destination, another gala, another meaningless evening of hollow laughter. The machine purred as it lifted off the helipad, city lights shrinking beneath him. But somewhere over the dark stretch of forest that divided the city from Lena's quiet town, fate snapped its fingers. A thunderous crack. Metal shrieked. Flames burst. And then, darkness. The billionaire who thought he was untouchable plummeted from the sky. Lena heard it before she saw it, the deafening explosion that rattled her small cabin windows. She froze, heart pounding, then bolted outside. In the distance, beyond the trees, a column of fire clawed toward the heavens. Without thinking, she ran. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. When she reached the crash site, the scene seared itself into her memory: twisted metal, fire licking through the wreckage, and a man pinned beneath. His white shirt stained red, his breaths ragged. "Help!" His voice was broken, almost gone. Lena's hands trembled, but instinct surged. She pulled at debris, screaming against the roar of flames until her muscles gave way. Somehow, through sheer will, she dragged him out, collapsing onto the dirt beside him as the wreckage groaned and collapsed behind them. She pressed her hand against his bleeding side, whispering, "Stay with me. Please, just stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, and for a fleeting second Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire untouchable, looked into the eyes of the woman who had just saved his life. Vulnerable. Human. Mortal. The ambulance lights came later. The sirens, the chaos, the rush. But in that frozen moment by the wreckage, two broken lives collided, and neither would ever be the same. Would you risk everything to save a stranger? Hit the like button if you believe one choice can change a life forever. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and dread, sharp enough to burn the back of Lena's throat. She sat slumped in a plastic chair, her hands raw and trembling. His blood, still stained her palms. No matter how hard she scrubbed, the image wouldn't fade, The fire, the shattered glass, the billionaire she had dragged from death. She should have gone home. She should have let the professionals handle it. But her legs refused to move, tethered by something she couldn't explain. She'd saved strangers before, patients who clung to her during her shifts, but this was different. Something about the man's eyes as he'd whispered, "Stay with me," had rooted itself deep in her chest. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, trapped between nightmares and reality. Flames chased him in his dreams, the roar of the helicopter's engine turning into a scream. And always, just before the fire consumed him, she appeared, the woman with fierce eyes and soot on her cheeks, pulling him out of the inferno. When his eyes finally opened, the sterile white of the hospital ceiling greeted him. His chest ached, his ribs felt cracked, and his voice was nothing more than a rasp. He tried to sit up, but pain seared through him, forcing a groan. "Don't move." The voice was soft but firm. His gaze shifted, and there she was. The stranger. Sitting by his bed, exhaustion etched into her features, her clothes singed at the edges. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You," his voice broke raw. "You pulled me out." Lena's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. "You'd be dead if I hadn't." There was no softness in her tone, no awe. Just blunt truth. She wasn't here to bask in his gratitude. She was here because walking away had felt impossible. A silence stretched, heavy with everything unspoken. Ethan's chest tightened, not just from the wounds, but from the strange vulnerability clawing through him. He wasn't used to weakness. He wasn't used to needing anyone. "You should have left me," he muttered, the words harsher than he intended. "People like me were not worth saving." Lena's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing. "Don't you dare say that. You're breathing because someone fought for you. Don't waste that." Her voice wavered at the edges, but it carried a steel that silenced him. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his father, not the board members, not the endless string of people who treated him like a prize. For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen. Not as a billionaire. Not as a legacy. But as a man clinging to life. The doctors rushed in, breaking the moment. They spoke in brisk tones, internal bleeding, fractures, concussion, but their words blurred together. Ethan's eyes kept drifting back to Lena, who lingered at the doorway, caught between leaving and staying. When they wheeled him out for further tests, Lena finally let herself collapse against the wall. Her chest heaved, and for the first time since the crash, her body shook. She pressed her hands against her face, hot tears slipping through her fingers. She hadn't cried when she pulled him from the wreckage. She hadn't cried during the ambulance ride. But here, in the sterile quiet of the hospital corridor, the weight of what she had done crashed down on her. She had saved a man's life. A man who looked at her as if she mattered. A man she would never see again once the headlines claimed him. Hours blurred into dawn. When Ethan was returned to his room, sedated and pale, Lena slipped inside. She should have walked away. She told herself she would. But her feet carried her to his bedside, where she watched his chest rise and fall. Something stirred in her. Not romance, not yet. Something older, deeper, the fragile thread that binds two souls in the moment between life and death. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're not alone. Not anymore." The next morning, the news exploded. Billionaire heir survives fiery helicopter crash. Photographers swarmed the hospital entrance, journalists speculating about boardroom implications, family reactions, financial futures. Ethan Caldwell's survival was no longer just his own story, it was a spectacle. Lena saw the headlines on a waiting room TV, her stomach sinking. She realized then who he truly was. She hadn't just saved a man, she had saved him. The billionaire untouchable. Her chest tightened. If she'd known, would she still have run into the fire? The answer came before doubt could drown her. Yes. She would have. Because when it mattered most, none of that had mattered. By the time she slipped quietly out of the hospital, Ethan stirred awake again. He noticed instantly, the chair by his bed was empty, the space where she had sat all night now cold. His heart sank with a weight he couldn't name. She was gone. And though he had everything, money, doctors, protection, he felt the strange absence of the one thing he couldn't buy, the presence of the woman who had saved him. Ethan's penthouse overlooked the skyline, its glass walls capturing every glittering light the city had to offer. Yet when he stood before them weeks after the crash, all he saw was fire. Flames licking metal, smoke filling his lungs, the weight of helplessness pressing against his chest. He gripped the shard of wreckage he had pocketed before leaving the hospital. The twisted piece of metal bit into his palm, grounding him. He had everything: doctors, private care, endless resources. But the memory of her, the woman with soot-streaked cheeks who refused to leave him in the wreck, haunted him. He didn't even know her name. Across town, Lena tried to bury the memory beneath work. She scrubbed hospital floors during night shifts, folded laundry during the day, tended to her mother in the evening. Yet when exhaustion slowed her down, when she finally sat in silence, the image of him always returned, bleeding, fragile, whispering, "Stay with me." It unsettled her. Why couldn't she let go? He was a billionaire, untouchable, unreachable. Their worlds weren't just apart, they were galaxies separated by class, wealth, and fate. She told herself she didn't need him. She had enough to worry about: her mother's failing treatments, bills that stacked higher by the week. But late at night, she would still dream of smoke and his eyes opening to hers. Ethan's board of directors had other priorities. Gregory, his father's ruthless protégé, stormed into Ethan's office one afternoon. "You missed another meeting." Gregory's voice was sharp, clipped, as if the crash had been nothing more than a scheduling inconvenience. Ethan leaned back, his ribs still sore beneath his shirt. "I nearly died, Greg. Forgive me if quarterly projections aren't my top concern." "Nearly dying doesn't excuse weakness," Gregory snapped, eyes narrowing. "Your father built this empire on steel and fire. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're not the man to lead it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had heard those words before, from his father, from headlines, from shadows in his own head. But this time, something inside him recoiled. He was tired of being told who he was supposed to be. And yet, when Gregory left, the old fear crept back. Maybe Gregory was right. Maybe he wasn't strong enough. Maybe the crash had only proved his father's warning: vulnerability was dangerous. And still, he remembered her voice. "Don't waste that." Meanwhile, Lena sat at her mother's bedside, spooning broth into trembling hands. Her mother's voice was weak but warm. "You saved someone, didn't you?" Lena froze. She hadn't told her mother, hadn't spoken a word of the billionaire. But somehow, her mother saw through her. "You came home that night with fire in your eyes," her mother whispered. "Not fear. Something else. Whoever he was, he mattered." Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to confess, to tell her mother about the man whose life she had carried from the flames. But what was there to say? That she saved him? That he looked at her like she was more than invisible? That she felt connected to someone she had no right to? Instead, she smiled faintly, brushing her mother's hand. "It was nothing, Mom. Just a night like any other." But her mother only gave her a knowing look. The world tried to push them back into their corners. Ethan, to his empire of glass and expectation. Lena, to her life of duty and struggle. They resisted the pull toward each other, even as it gnawed at their hearts. Ethan tried to distract himself with business dinners, forced smiles for the press, and polished reassurances to investors. But beneath the table, his hands trembled, and the shard of wreckage stayed hidden in his pocket. Lena tried to convince herself she belonged only in her world of hospital corridors and whispered promises to her mother. But sometimes, when she passed the newsstand and saw Ethan Caldwell's face on glossy covers, her heart would falter. Not because he was a billionaire, but because she remembered the man in the dirt, bleeding and fragile, who had clung to her voice like a lifeline. The turning point came one evening when Ethan slipped out of his penthouse unnoticed, driven by an ache he couldn't silence. He found himself walking through Lena's town, the air colder, the streets humbler, far from the polished marble he was used to. He didn't know why he was there. He only knew he had to be. At that same moment, Lena stood outside the pharmacy, clutching her mother's prescriptions and calculating what bill she'd delay this time to cover the cost. She turned, and there he was. The billionaire. For a second, the world stopped. His suit jacket couldn't hide the bandages beneath, and her weary eyes couldn't mask the flicker of recognition. "You," Ethan whispered, breath catching. Her heart thundered. "You shouldn't be here." Neither stepped closer. Both were pulled, yet both resisted, walls rising, fears whispering. "I had to see you," he admitted, his voice raw. I needed to know you were real. Lena swallowed hard. Her instinct screamed to run, to shut it down, to remind herself that their lives were not meant to touch again. But deep inside, something trembled at his words. Real. That night, they parted without answers. He returned to his tower of glass, she to her cabin of struggle. Yet neither slept. For the first time since the crash, they both admitted the truth, quietly, privately, in the silence of their hearts. They were already connected. And no matter how hard they resisted, fate was not done with them. The storm arrived without warning. Clouds rolled in thick and heavy, thunder cracking across the horizon as rain lashed against the city. Ethan sat in the back of his car, watching lightning split the sky. His driver hesitated at the flooded roads. "Sir, the main highway is closed. The storm's too dangerous." Ethan pressed his temple, weariness sinking deep. "Then take the rural route. I don't care how long it takes." The car wound through narrow backroads, past forests that bent under the weight of wind. But halfway through, the engine sputtered. With a shudder, the car died. "Fantastic," Ethan muttered. The driver apologized, fumbling with his phone. No signal. Rain hammered the windshield. Ethan cursed under his breath, reaching for the door. "I'll find shelter. Stay with the car." Lena hadn't expected visitors. The storm had knocked out power at her cabin, leaving only the crackle of a wood fire. She sat by her mother's bedside, reading aloud by candlelight. The sudden knock at the door startled her, sharp against the howl of wind. Her heart pounded as she opened it, and froze. Ethan Caldwell stood drenched on her doorstep, rainwater streaming down his hair, his shirt clinging to his bandaged ribs. "You," she breathed. His lips parted, just as stunned. "Lena." For a moment, the storm outside seemed quieter than the storm inside her chest. "I didn't know where else to go," Ethan admitted, his voice rough. "My car broke down. No signal. I remembered the road, from that night." Her instincts warred. She should send him away. Their worlds didn't mix. Every second he stayed here threatened the fragile balance she clung to. But outside, the rain pounded mercilessly, and his shivering frame told her he wouldn't last. "Come in," she said softly. The cabin was small, worn, nothing like the luxury Ethan was accustomed to. Yet as he stepped inside, warmth brushed over him, not from the fire, but from the space itself. Cozy, lived in, filled with care. He caught sight of a photograph on the wall, Lena and her mother smiling in sunlight, and felt a pang of envy. He had pictures in his penthouse too, but none held love like this. Lena fetched a towel and thrust it at him, keeping her distance. "Dry off before you catch pneumonia." He smirked faintly, trying to lighten the tension. "I already survived a helicopter crash. A little rain won't kill me." Her glare silenced him. "Don't joke about that." Ethan's smile faltered. The weight of her words cut deeper than he expected. She hadn't said it casually, she meant it. She still carried that night with her, just as he did. Hours passed as the storm raged. They sat opposite each other by the fire, silence stretching long between them. Lena's mother slept peacefully in the next room, her breathing faint but steady. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You never told me your name that night." She hesitated, then whispered, "Lena." He repeated it softly, as if testing its weight. "Lena. I've been searching for you since the hospital. Do you know how impossible it is to find someone who doesn't want to be found?" Her chest tightened. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. You're from a world I don't belong to. And yet you saved me." His voice was steady, eyes locked on hers. "When no one else could. When no one else would." The fire popped, sparks rising into the dark. Lena hugged her knees to her chest, trying to steady her voice. "You don't understand. I already have too much on my shoulders. My mother, my bills, my life isn't built to hold someone like you." Ethan leaned forward, pain flickering across his face, not just from his ribs but from her words. "Do you think I'm asking you to carry me? Lena, I don't need saving from the fire anymore. I need saving from myself. And you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man, not a fortune." Her heart hammered, but fear rooted her. She had spent her life building walls, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. Letting him in meant risking everything: her focus, her safety, her heart. The storm pressed them closer. Powerless to leave, they were forced to face what they both denied. At one point, Ethan noticed her shiver as the fire dimmed. He stood to add wood, but winced at the movement, pain ripping through his ribs. Lena was at his side instantly, her hand steadying him. "Sit down before you tear your stitches," she scolded, her voice sharper than her touch. Their eyes met, close now, breath mingling in the firelight. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air thickened, charged with everything they hadn't said. Then, as if burned, Lena pulled away. "This is temporary," she whispered. "When the storm passes, you go back to your world. And I go back to mine." Ethan's expression darkened, but he nodded slowly. "Maybe. But tell me this, Lena, does it feel temporary?" She had no answer. The fire cracked, the storm howled, and somewhere between the thunder and silence, both realized that proximity wasn't just circumstance. It was fate pressing them together, daring them to confront what they were too afraid to name. The storm stretched into the night, a relentless rhythm of rain on the cabin roof. Lena sat by the fire, arms wrapped around herself, while Ethan leaned back against the chair, his features shadowed in flickering light. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was heavy, waiting to break. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I can see it in your eyes. How long have you been doing it alone?" Lena stiffened, her instinct to retreat sharp as ever. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because I know what it feels like." His tone was low, steady. To be surrounded by people, yet still carry everything alone. She glanced at him, torn. His face was calm, but his eyes, those guarded storm-dark eyes, betrayed the truth. He wasn't fishing for sympathy. He was speaking from a wound of his own. "You grew up with wealth, didn't you?" she asked suddenly. "The kind people like me could never dream of." Ethan gave a humorless laugh. "Wealth? Yes. But not family. My father, he thought money was love. If he provided, he never had to be present. And my mother, she drowned in silence. Parties, charities, diamonds, everything but warmth." His jaw tightened, as if holding back more than he wanted to admit. "I was raised in mansions, Lena. But I was starving every single day." The words cut into her, softer than any confession he could have made. She thought of the photo on her wall, her mother's fragile smile. Poor, yes. Struggling, always. But love had never been absent in this cabin. Her turn came uninvited. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "My father left when I was 12. Said he was going to find work in another city. He never came back. My mother, she gave up everything just to keep me in school. When she got sick, I dropped out. Jobs, double shifts, bills, every day since has been survival." Ethan didn't speak, didn't pity. He simply listened, and that was somehow worse, because it stripped away her armor. She swallowed hard. "I can't afford to dream, Ethan. I don't get to." Every time I look at her, Lena's voice cracked, and she bit her lip to steady it. "I wonder how long I have left before she slips away. And I can't save her. I don't have the power." Ethan's hand twitched against the armrest, as if he wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. Instead, his voice came low, rough. "You already have more power than you realize. You pulled me out of fire and death with your bare hands. Do you know what that means? You saved a man who had everything but nothing. And in that moment, you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing." She shook her head, blinking hard. "Don't put me on a pedestal. I don't want to be the woman you remember for a night. I'm just me. Ordinary. Broken." "No." His voice sharpened. "You're the first real thing that's ever happened to me. Don't diminish that." The storm thundered, rattling the windows. Lena stood, pacing, her emotions colliding like waves. "You don't understand, Ethan. If I let myself believe in whatever this is, what happens when you leave? When you go back to your penthouses and boardrooms, to women who actually fit your world? Then I'll spend every second proving I don't belong there either." His intensity shook her. She turned away, but his words burrowed deep, planting a seed she didn't want to water. Later, When her mother stirred and called softly from the bedroom, Lena went to her side. Ethan lingered near the doorway, watching quietly as Lena soothed the frail woman with tender patience. He saw how her hand smoothed the blanket, how her voice softened into warmth. And he realized something. Lena carried a love he'd been starving for all his life. When Lena returned to the fire, he spoke again. "You think you're broken, but what I see is strength. You think you're ordinary, but you carry extraordinary love. Do you know how rare that is?" Her chest ached, a war between fear and longing tearing her apart. At last, she whispered, "And what about you, Ethan? What do you carry?" For the first time since she'd met him, his confident facade cracked fully. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire as if it might burn away his truth. "I carry guilt," he said. "Every deal I've made, every enemy I've created, it all led to that night in the helicopter. I was never meant to survive. That crash wasn't an accident, it was a message. And sometimes I wonder if I deserved it." Lena's breath caught. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. "Do you?" she whispered. His eyes lifted to hers, glassy with something he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Before you, I thought maybe I did. But now I think fate gave me a second chance. And it gave me you." The fire burned low, shadows stretching across the walls. Lena felt the ground shift beneath her, as if every truth they'd shared had redrawn the lines of their worlds. She should be afraid. She should push him away. But as Ethan's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching, she realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, she wanted to believe in more than survival. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the cabin drenched in dew and silence. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, scattering gold across the wooden floorboards. Lena stood at the counter, brewing weak coffee, the kind she always drank to stretch the supply. Ethan leaned against the doorway, hair tousled, the lines of exhaustion still etched on his face. "Does it always taste like mud?" he asked dryly, taking a sip, "or did you save the bad batch just for me?" Lena glanced over her shoulder, a small smirk tugging at her lips despite herself. "You're welcome to buy your own beans next time. Oh wait, you don't exactly blend in at the village market, do you?" For the first time since the crash, Ethan laughed. Really laughed. It startled them both. The sound filled the cabin, warm and unguarded, as if it had been locked away for years. "Careful," Lena teased softly, "you almost sounded human for a second." They slipped into something lighter that morning, a rhythm of banter neither of them expected. Lena showed him how to chop vegetables without nearly losing a finger. Ethan told her about the time he nearly burned down a penthouse kitchen trying to make toast. "You mean to tell me," Lena said, raising an eyebrow, "you can close billion-dollar deals but not use a toaster?" "I had staff for that," he admitted with a shrug, feigning arrogance. "Besides, toast is overrated." "You're impossible," she said, but her laughter betrayed her. Later, when her mother napped, they sat outside on the porch. The air smelled of wet earth, fresh and alive. Birds sang in the distance, and for once, there was no ticking clock pressing against Lena's chest. Ethan leaned back, gaze on the trees swaying in the breeze. "You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't surviving all the time?" Lena froze. Dreams were a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in years. "I used to want to teach," she admitted quietly. "Kids, literature maybe. My mom always said I had a way with words. But life had other plans." Ethan turned to her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "I can see it. You'd light up a classroom." The words hit deeper than she expected. Not because he said them, but because he believed them. That evening, with the fire crackling again, the lightness gave way to something heavier, more vulnerable. Ethan had found a small shard of glass among the wreckage the day before, a jagged reminder of the crash. Now he turned it over in his hand, the fire reflecting off its edges. "This nearly killed me," he said, voice low. "But it also saved me. Because without it, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met you." Lena's chest tightened. "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because they sound like promises. And I don't trust promises." His gaze searched hers. "Then trust me now. Just in this moment." Her breath hitched. She wanted to pull back to shield herself, but something about the way he said it, like it was both a plea and a vow, unraveled her defenses. The cabin had never felt colder. The fire burned low, but its warmth never reached them. Lena moved quietly through the rooms, tending to her mother with mechanical precision, never once looking Ethan in the eye. Ethan, meanwhile, drifted like a shadow, present but absent, his silence heavier than any words he could have spoken. The glass shard was gone. Their fragile bond, broken with it. That night, Lena sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, a face etched with both love and loss. She pressed her forehead against the pane, whispering to herself. "You were a fool to believe, Lena. A fool to think he could ever see you." But her heart betrayed her. Despite everything he had said, she couldn't forget the way he'd held her hand, the way his voice had cracked when he told her he didn't want to leave. Those moments had been real. She knew they had. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "So why did you destroy it?" Across the room, Ethan sat hunched by the fire, head in his hands. The silence roared in his ears, but inside his mind, Lena's voice echoed louder still. "I gave you everything I had. My heart, even when I swore I wouldn't." He had broken her. Worse, he had proven himself the very man he despised, incapable of trust, blind to love, lashing out at the one person who had saved him not just from fire, but from emptiness. Gregory's words had been poison, yes, but it was Ethan's pride that had wielded the blade. In the quiet hours before dawn, Ethan stood and walked outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the world soaked and raw. He wandered into the forest where the crash site still lingered, a charred scar against the earth. Ash and twisted metal glistened with dew. He knelt by the wreckage, pressing his palm to the cold ground. Memories surged, the roar of the helicopter, the explosion, the fire licking at his skin, then Lena's voice, desperate and determined, pulling him back to life. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And I repaid you with cruelty." He bowed his head, rain dripping from his hair, his chest aching with remorse. For the first time in his life, Ethan Asher wanted nothing of wealth, nothing of power, only the chance to earn Lena's forgiveness. Back at the cabin, Lena sat by her mother's bedside. The older woman stirred, her frail hand brushing Lena's cheek. "You've been crying," she murmured, her voice weak but knowing. Lena tried to smile. "Don't worry about me, Mama. Just rest." But her mother's cloudy eyes pierced her. "It's about him, isn't it? The man you saved." Lena froze. Her mother's voice softened. "Don't let fear steal what love tries to give, Lena. You deserve more than survival. You deserve joy." The words cracked open something inside her. For so long, she had carried the weight of sacrifice, of silence, of survival. Could she truly allow herself more? She glanced toward the door, where Ethan's absence felt like a wound. Her heart ached with the memory of his touch, his laugh, his confession. She hated him for breaking her. But she hated herself more for still wanting him. When Ethan returned at dawn, soaked and hollow-eyed, Lena was waiting by the fire. She stood as he entered, her arms crossed, her face guarded. "We need to talk," he said, voice raw. Her lips trembled, but she steadied them. "Then talk." He stepped closer, every word weighted with truth. "I let Gregory's poison twist me. I let my fear turn into cruelty. And I said things I can never take back. But Lena," his voice cracked. "Every word I meant to say was this: you are the only real thing I've ever known. And I'm terrified of losing you." Lena's eyes filled, but she held her ground. "And what happens when your world calls you back? When the boardrooms, the wealth, the women who belong in your orbit return?" "Then I'll turn my back on all of it," Ethan said fiercely. "Because none of it matters without you." She shook her head, tears spilling now. "You don't understand. If I let myself love you, Ethan, it could destroy me. I don't have the luxury of heartbreak. I can't survive it." His chest ached, but he stepped closer, voice breaking. "Then let me carry it with you. Don't survive alone anymore. Please." The silence between them quivered, fragile as glass. Finally, Lena whispered, "If you hurt me again, there won't be a second chance." Ethan nodded, eyes wet. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never do." She exhaled, a sound half-sob, half-relief, and for the first time since the night of the crash, she allowed herself to believe. Ethan reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. The bond that had shattered was fragile still, but in that moment, it began to mend. Would you forgive someone who shattered you, if they stood before you broken, asking for one last chance? The dawn light filtered through the cabin, pale gold against the worn wooden beams. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel heavy with unspoken words. Ethan and Lena sat side by the fire, their hands loosely intertwined. Fragile but real. Still, the world outside had not vanished. Gregory's threat hung over them like smoke after a blaze. Ethan knew they couldn't hide forever, not without putting Lena and her mother in greater danger. "We need to end this," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Gregory won't stop until he thinks he's won. And I won't let him find you here." Lena studied him, fear flickering in her eyes. "And what happens if you go after him? What if you don't come back?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "Then at least I'll know I fought for something worth dying for. For us." Her throat tightened. "Just, don't make me a widow before I've even been a bride." The word slipped out, raw and unplanned, and heat rushed to her cheeks. Ethan's lips parted, his eyes widening, not with shock, but with something far deeper. "Then marry me," he whispered. Lena's heart pounded. "Ethan." "I mean it," he said, voice fierce with conviction. "Not someday. Not when the world approves. Now. Because life is too fragile to wait, and I don't want another sunrise to come without you as mine." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't need diamonds or mansions. I just need to know you'll stay." "I'll stay," he vowed. "With you. Always." And for the first time, she believed him. The confrontation with Gregory came swiftly. Word of Ethan's survival had spread, and Gregory arrived at the cabin with his men, smug and certain of victory. But Ethan, armed not with wealth but with resolve, faced him down. "You tried to kill me," Ethan said coldly. "But you failed. And now, you'll never touch what matters to me again." Gregory sneered. "What matters? That girl? Don't tell me the great Ethan Asher threw away his empire for a nobody." Ethan stepped closer, unflinching. "She isn't a nobody. She's everything." The silence stretched, thick with words unsaid. And then, almost without realizing, Lena whispered, "Sometimes I wish I hadn't saved you." Ethan flinched as if struck. "You don't mean that." She swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyes. "I do. Because the more you're here, the harder it is to imagine you leaving. And when you do, it'll destroy me." His face shifted, pain flickering across his features. He set the glass shard down carefully, as though it carried the weight of his heart. "Lena," he said softly, "I don't want to leave." The space between them crackled like a live wire. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't move. His fingers curled around hers, warm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Her walls crumbled in that touch. For the first time since her father left, since her mother's illness began, Lena allowed herself to feel something more than duty. She felt wanted. Seen. Alive. Their eyes locked, and for a breathless moment, the world shrank to just them. The firelight, the closeness, the ache of something forbidden blooming between them. Ethan leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll stop." Lena's lips parted, but no words came. She couldn't deny it. The pull between them was undeniable, magnetic, dangerous. Instead she whispered, "We can't." But her hands didn't let go of his. Her mother stirred in the next room, a soft cough breaking the spell. Lena jerked back, heart pounding, as if reality had crashed through the fragile bubble around them. Ethan pulled away too, running a hand through his hair, frustration and longing warring in his eyes. "Another time," he muttered, half to himself. Lena stood, retreating to her mother's side, every step heavy with unspoken words. She sat by the bedside, but her hands still tingled where his had touched. That night, neither of them slept. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shard of glass glinting on the table beside him. Lena sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the floor, her thoughts a storm she couldn't quiet. Both knew the truth. Something had shifted. They could no longer pretend this was just survival or gratitude. Something real, something irreversible, had begun to take root. And neither of them knew how to stop it. The days blurred together, fragile and precarious, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. Ethan had begun to help with small things, chopping wood, fetching supplies from the market under Lena's wary supervision. There was laughter sometimes, silence often, and beneath it all a current neither dared name. But the peace was not built to last. It began with a letter. Gregory's men had been searching relentlessly for Ethan, tracking whispers of the crash's aftermath. One evening, as Lena returned from the village, she found a folded envelope slipped under the cabin door. No name, just thick paper sealed with wax. She froze, sensing danger, but Ethan tore it open before she could stop him. Inside was a single sheet. "How much is survival worth to you, Lena? How much for the billionaire's life? Everything has a price." The words clawed through Ethan like knives. His chest tightened, rage colliding with dread. "Gregory," he muttered, eyes burning. "He knows." Lena's face drained of color. "Ethan, I swear I never." But he didn't let her finish. The poison in the letter worked too quickly. That night, tension suffocated the cabin. Ethan paced near the fire, fists clenched, while Lena sat rigid at the table, her hands trembling. "You need to tell me the truth," Ethan said sharply. "I am," she whispered. "I don't know how he found us." "Convenient, isn't it?" His voice dripped with bitterness. "First you save me out of nowhere. Then Gregory's men appear at your doorstep with cryptic notes. Maybe it wasn't fate, Lena. Maybe it was strategy." Her eyes widened, stung. "You think I planned this? That I pulled you from burning wreckage just to sell you out? Why not?" He rounded on her, his face shadowed and hard. "Everyone else in my life has. My partners. My so-called friends. Even my family. Why should you be any different?" The words cracked something in her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Because I'm not them. I don't care about your money. I never have." "Then why does it feel like you've been playing me from the start?" His voice rose, crueler now, fueled by fear more than truth. "Maybe Gregory's right. You were just waiting for your chance to cash in on the broken billionaire." The silence that followed was deafening. Lena's face crumpled as if he had struck her. She stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't mean that." But Ethan didn't take it back. His silence confirmed the wound. Her voice broke when she finally spoke. "I gave you everything I had. My time. My trust. My heart, even when I swore I wouldn't. And this is what you think of me." He flinched, regret flickering in his eyes, but pride and suspicion chained his tongue. She turned away, shoulders trembling. "You're not the man I thought you were. You're just another rich boy who can't see past his own scars." The fire popped violently, sending sparks into the air. Ethan grabbed the glass shard from the table, the very piece of wreckage that had become his talisman, and hurled it into the flames. It shattered, hissing as the fire consumed it. The symbol of his survival, their bond, was gone. Lena gasped, the sound torn from her like grief itself. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes burning. "That shard was proof that you lived. Proof that what we had was real. And you destroyed it." "Maybe it was never real," Ethan spat, though his voice trembled. That was the final blow. She grabbed her coat, hand shaking, and bolted into the night. Rain had begun again, thin and cold, soaking her instantly. Ethan stood frozen at the door, torn between running after her and collapsing under the weight of his own words. In the distance, Lena's sobs dissolved into the storm. She ran until the cabin's light disappeared, until her lungs burned, until the man she had saved felt like a stranger she should never have touched. Back inside, Ethan sank to his knees before the fire. His chest heaved, his throat raw, his fists bloody where he'd struck the floor. He wanted to call her name, to beg forgiveness, but pride sealed his lips. And for the first time since the crash, the silence felt like death itself. Hours later, Lena returned only to tend to her mother. She moved like a ghost, avoiding Ethan's eyes, her voice hollow. She sat by her mother's side until dawn, whispering comfort, her heart breaking in silence. Ethan watched from across the room, hollowed out, a man who had burned the only bridge he ever wanted to keep. And when the morning sun crept in, it brought no warmth. Only the chilling truth. They were both more alone than they had ever been. Gregory faltered at the steel in Ethan's voice. In that moment, The battle was already lost. Not in power, but in principle. The men who followed Gregory saw it too. One by one, their loyalty fractured. Without power, Gregory's threats crumbled. He was left with nothing but his bitterness. When it was over, Ethan returned to the cabin. Lena waited on the porch, wringing her hands, her eyes wide with dread. The moment she saw him alive, she ran into his arms. He held her, trembling, pressing his face into her hair. "It's done," he murmured. "We're free." Her tears wet his shirt, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "Then let's not waste another moment." They married in the village chapel a week later, with only her mother and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. No silk, no diamonds, no press cameras. Just Lena in a simple white dress, Ethan in a borrowed suit, and vows spoken with trembling sincerity. "I was never meant to survive," Ethan said as he slipped a modest ring onto her finger. "But you gave me life. And now, I promise to spend every day proving I was worth saving." Lena's tears shone as she whispered back, "I never asked for a billionaire. I only asked for love. And somehow I got both." The villagers clapped, her mother wept, and Ethan kissed her like a man reborn. Life didn't magically become easy. Lena still worked tirelessly to care for her mother, and Ethan struggled to rebuild, not the empire Gregory had stolen, but something new, something grounded in honesty. Together, they planted a garden outside the cabin, each seed a promise of growth. Sometimes Ethan still woke in the night, haunted by the crash, by Gregory, by his own cruelty. But Lena was always there, her hand warm against his chest, reminding him he was no longer alone. And sometimes Lena still doubted, still feared abandonment, still braced for loss. But Ethan was there, whispering vows against her skin, showing her that not all promises were lies. Together, they learned love wasn't about perfection. It was about survival, through fire, through betrayal, through fear. It was about choosing each other, again and again. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Ethan found the courage to return to the crash site with Lena by his side. They knelt together in the clearing, the wreckage still rusting among the ferns. "I used to think this place was where my life ended," Ethan said quietly. "But now I know, it's where it began." Lena reached down and picked up a tiny piece of metal from the earth, smaller than the shard he had thrown into the fire. She pressed it into his hand. "Then let this remind you. Not of death, but of rebirth." He closed his fist around it, tears in his eyes. "With you always." They stood there as the sun dipped low, the wreckage bathed in golden light. It was no longer a grave. It was a testament. Would you risk everything, even your life, even your pride, for a love that pulled you from the fire?
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time and support mean the world to me. If this story touched your heart, then trust me, you're going to love the next one even more. It's filled with twists, emotions, and surprises you won't want to miss. So go ahead and click on the story showing on your screen right now to continue the journey. I'll meet you there.